Chicago's West Loop is known for five-star restaurants, expensive condos, and the campuses of corporate behemoths. But the West Loop's status as a happening neighborhood is pretty recent, only really kicking off in the 80s and 90s. The area was home to a lot of manufacturing in the early 20th century, but many of those plants over the next 75 years or so moved elsewhere, leaving a graveyard of empty warehouses and factories. A section of Madison Street was known as Skid Row through the mid 60s, and the Fulton Market District was home to meatpacking even as recently as 2016, as shown on Google Maps. So, what made this neighborhood transform? Some may say it's inevitable for such prime real estate so near to downtown to see gentrification, which might be true. But I wanted to know what key milestones pushed the neighborhood toward its tipping point. And like many things in the real world, it's complicated and difficult to point to definitive causes. But thanks to a great book by Connie Fairbanks called Chicago's West Loop Then and Now, I was able to dig into some of the history. Note that the conclusions and summarizations I'm about to share are my own, based on research from Connie's book. And the reasons for West Loop's transformation can largely be broken into three buckets: large anchor tenants, housing transformations, and restaurant developments. Let's start with the first bucket. And what better place to start than with Oprah? Harpo Studios, which is just Oprah spelled backwards, went up in the West Loop in the late 1980s. The area was rough, and she moved into the neighborhood because it, quote, seemed like an open door opportunity for growth and development. We all know how popular Oprah got, and having such a large beacon in the neighborhood definitely left an impact, as we'll see later. The next large anchor was the United Center on the west side, completed in 1994. Now, the United Center is by most definitions west of the West Loop, but with it hosting the 1996 Democratic National Convention, there was a lot of attention put into making the area and surrounding areas look nice. They tore down some nearby buildings in a neglected housing project, they repaved roads, and added beautification to a lot of the West Loop. Sources say that this event was sort of riding along the wave of gentrification already, but it certainly can't hurt to have $32 million poured into an event in the area. And then, of course, the Chicago Bulls, which play at the United Center, did pretty well in the 90s, which cannot have hurt things. Now we can talk about housing. Annie Properties, which was owned by Louis and Ann Costner, is credited with a large chunk of the revitalization of old warehouse spaces. The couple basically just saw an opportunity for growth in the area and relatively inexpensive real estate. In the late 80s, they started with 1327 West Washington and expanded to a very large portfolio, which I'm sure is worth many, many millions today. The Costners bought and refurbished many buildings that you've probably seen, like this one at 1017 West Washington. They sold their company in 2000. One of the earliest high-rise developments was Presidential Towers, built in 1986. Critically, the site where the towers stand used to be the city's Skid Row, packed with SROs, but in the 60s, the city cleared these couple blocks. The site found itself in purgatory for a while, but eventually became the Presidential Towers, which received over $65 million in subsidies. They built the structures like a self-contained fortress to make it more attractive to renters in an area which was not particularly attractive. And finally, for the restaurant developments, which are probably the most well-known part of West Loop. Let's start with Jerry Kleiner, a designer, real estate investor, and restaurateur. In 1980, he saw potential in the West Loop and started buying up properties, also opening a nightclub. Then in 91, Jerry partnered up with some folks creating the KDK Group. In that same year, they opened an Italian restaurant called Vivo on Randolph Street when there wasn't much in the way of fine dining in the area. Then they followed that up with Marché across the street in 93 and Red Light 2 doors down in 1996. At the same time, Wishbone popped up next to Harpo Studios in 1992, and it became a staple of the area. The Costners had convinced the owner of the first Wishbone restaurant, which was farther north off of Grand, to expand into the West Loop. To top off the early entrance into the restaurant scene was the one-off hospitality group. Apparently in the late 90s, the partners were inspired by Jerry Kleiner's restaurants and opened up Blackbird in 97, which later got a Michelin star and, to quote Connie Fairbanks, put Chicago on the food map. But one-off was more than just one-off because they opened up Avec next door in 2003, which is still touted as one of the West Loop's best. And to top those two hits off, in 2008, they opened the Publican on Fulton Street, and on Google Maps, you can see the environment they were building into, which is quite jarring compared to today. One other early player to mention was La Sardine in 1998, located very near Harpo Studios and Wishbone. Now, undoubtedly, there are other restaurants to mention, but these seem to be some of the most influential early entrants that started turning the West Loop into a restaurant destination. So, to sum it all up, we can attribute the transformation of the West Loop in large part to Oprah, the United Center, and the 96 DNC, the vision of Louis and Ann Costner, the desire of the city to tear down Skid Row, and a number of restaurateurs willing to take a chance on a very gritty area. Thanks for watching.